I want to welcome you to the animal welfare meeting. This community meeting is not a committee meeting. So Dr. Pisano is going to run the meeting. There'll be a time for questions at the end. I just ask you to be respectful to that and be mindful of the time. With that, I'll give it over to Dr. Pisano.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. Before we get started, I just have two quick commercials. I know you're all here because you love animals. Cameron, you want to just stand up for a second? So we have this kitten. We didn't find her, but she apparently, her mom moved the litter and left her behind. And so somebody brought her to the shelter, and she's so young, so we didn't want to leave her at the shelter overnight. But we're looking for a foster rescue or somebody who wants to adopt this beautiful kitten. Do I hear once? Going once? Y'all can, who wants to hold the kitten right now? Raise your hand. You can just hold her. Oh, we're good. We have a placement. Thank you. My work is done here. Good night. But I have just one other quick commercial. So this is a beautiful 66-pound mixed breed that came to the shelter as a stray and is the sweetest dog, and so sweet she can't stop wagging her tail. And unfortunately, she's in a kennel where her tail hits the wall. And I don't know if you can see in that picture, probably not. There's blood on the wall from her just being so happy. So I named her Happy because I'm so creative. And I literally was talking to her and I had blood in my pants because she was just happy to see us. So this is a dog who needs to get out of the shelter and have a place to run. So if anybody knows someone who could transfer her, pull her, adopt her, that would be amazing. She's very sweet. She has no name in the computer, but Becca and Catherine know who she is and will be at the shelter tomorrow. Thank you so much. So we are Maddie's Million Pet Challenge. We are funded by Maddie's, and we are a group of 4 partners. Team Shelter USA is my consulting company. Cameron Moore from the University of Florida. University of Florida is a partner, as is the University of California and Open Door Veterinary Collective. Cameron and I have been doing consults for 11 years now, and we network and partner with a lot of organizations. We have a mentorship program as well. So Mariah is sitting next to Cameron. She is a 4th-year veterinary student that you can probably talk into shelter medicine, so tell her how fabulous it is. And then Dr. Becky and the team from UT, from the veterinary school, have joined us. So we're thrilled to have them with us because they're already coming to the table with portals that we didn't expect, and they're going to do the installations. I mean, we're so thrilled to have them. But in any event, we are happy to be in your community, and I'm going to tell you tonight's presentation is about what's happening in the industry and about what we know now that we did not know when I graduated vet school in 1994. Holy cow, those of us in it all those years, man, it looks nothing like it does today, thank God. We've come a long way. We know more, we have data. We didn't have data back then. We just thought, this is probably a good idea, why don't we do this? Not knowing that that wasn't the right pathway, that we need to do things differently. So our work in the last 11 years has been having the privilege to visit shelters around the country. I still have to add some blue states, but we've been in more than half the country, the Caribbean islands, the Hawaiian islands, and y'all, it doesn't matter where we are. We are all facing the same exact challenges with respect to animal welfare. A lot of times, communities tell us, well, you don't understand, Dr. Pisano, because here, ... And you know what? We don't have good doctors, so we have to transport to this community. And guess what? We went to that community and they said, we don't have good doctors here. We have to transfer to that community, the same community that was transferring to them. So I can promise you that nothing we hear is different or unique, but the beauty of our work is that we are here to tell you that the solutions are universal. I mean, the scale of the challenges is different, right? So a community like Dallas, Texas versus McCreary County, Kentucky population, 15,000, the scale is different, but the challenges are the same. And this is really important for you to all understand. So we have not made up any of these recommendations that I'm going to talk to you about tonight. We are part of the group of national experts that have these core recommendations that we all agree upon. We now have an Association of Shelter Veterinarians who's published the guidelines for standards of care in animal shelters. So everything we recommend is in line with that, and all the national animal welfare groups. You may have heard of Human Animal Support Services, or HAS. If you haven't, please go online and learn. And you have endless resources there. At the end of this presentation, there's a resource slide, and I'm going to be sharing this presentation with the Sheriff's Office so that this can be available to you, so you don't have to feel like you need to take notes or take pictures, although you are welcome to. So for all these years, we have been seeing the same challenges and knowing and seeing that the same solutions work. So I did publish the best practice playbook for animal shelters in 2019. And after the pandemic, when the pandemic hit, we were like, oh boy, like, is this going to be obsolete? Are our recommendations going to be obsolete? And in fact, they are more important now than ever. And those are the things that I'm going to talk to you about. You'll see not every shelter is doing every single thing that we're recommending, but our job is to help the Sheriff's Office and your shelter and your community bridge that gap. So what does that mean? The ongoing goals for everything we do are we respect in a community. There are some communities that the nonprofits do the public and animal safety work. In other communities, law enforcement does that, or it's a blend. There is no normal. But in any event, our ongoing goals, one is public and animal safety. So those are the things that we have to make sure we're doing. But second is, we need to stop separating pets and people. And that has been the greatest transformation that I've seen in my career, is we are now focusing on, wait a minute, why are we separating pets and people? And guess what? I did it too, because you're my people, we have been a very judgmental group, have we not? I can promise you, when I was shelter director, you're gonna surrender your pet? Bye-bye. Yeah, I'm not gonna ask you what help you need, because I'm too busy judging you and thinking that you're a bad person for surrendering your pet. Well, thankfully, we have studies now, we have successful programs, we have so many great stories about those people who didn't want to surrender, they didn't want to give up their pets, they didn't have any other options, and guess what? I never asked them, what do you need? How can we help you? Is it something temporary? And guess what? In 2015, the ASPCA put out this study that showed 86% of the people didn't want to surrender. They just needed temporary help. Nobody ever asked them what help, so they were separated from their pets, and ... And back then, 30 years ago, boy, were we euthanizing for space, helping animals for space. Thankfully, we're no longer doing that for the most part in the country. Nationally, the save rate for sheltered animals is in the mid-80s now. So we have come a long way, thanks to all of our hard work. But safety net, access to care that I'm going to talk about. And then if they do come in the shelter, we need to pay attention to their mental well-being as well as their physical well-being. I also want to touch on the idea of this magical 90% and where that came from. Years ago, when there was not a lot of life-saving in our municipal shelters, we had this benchmark, this stretch goal of this 90%, and that was considered quote-unquote no-kill, not a term I use, but it's a very familiar term. But as we've progressed and become a much more mature animal welfare industry and saving so many more animals, that is actually not the most important percentage and not the most important number. Euthanasia should be reserved for large community unsafe dogs, dogs that we would be afraid to have in our homes or in our neighbors' homes or with our kids, etc. So large unsafe dogs, and then medical beyond anybody's resources or the resources available to us. Those are important categories to understand, and remember, shelter to shelter, and community to community, there's different levels of resources. So in one community, there may be more medical life-saving than others, but in general, thinking about that 90%, we want to shift the conversation to number one, making sure we're using the shelter as a last resort, and that we're looking at those categories and not just looking at a number that artificially thinks that we're successful or not. So we could have a shelter who only gets animals that have to be euthanized, right? Severe, like cars, injuries, vicious dogs, things like that, right? And your percentage is going to be a lot lower. So just thinking about that so that we're all on the same page. The other thing to remember, and I'm so glad that I recently learned these numbers, is it helps us keep things in perspective. There are 187 million pets in the United States, and less than 3% are going into shelters. PetSmart Charities just did a presentation that said there's approximately 8 million new pets going into shelters, into homes each year. So that means even if everyone did adopt from a shelter or rescue group, there's still a need. So I think this is an important thing for us to remember, because I'm still hearing a lot of people say there's this dramatic overpopulation of animals, when I think we need to look at it a little bit differently and concentrate on that crisis that is access to care. And when I say that, I mean spay neuter is part of that. But these national stats, all these things are online. Best Friends and Shelter Animals Count have a lot of great information on there. But universally, what we're seeing now is large dogs staying in shelters longer, and if they have some sort of behavior level from something minor to something major, that the decisions around their care and perhaps the decision whether or not to place them, these are the struggles that have become so dire that it's tearing teams apart, it's turning a lot of us against each other. So it's a really hard time, and I think I will always stand behind. I don't want to talk about your length of stay or any of your barriers while animals are in shelters. I want to talk about what you did to prevent them from going into the shelter, because any shelter stay for pets or people is something that is very stressful. The veterinary shortage, I know your shelter here is having trouble finding veterinarians. This is a national crisis. There's people in all different kinds of organizations trying to address that, but no, you're not alone there. Also, the top 2 reasons for surrendering to a shelter are too many, which I do think is related to lack of spay-neuter. We still have people who, again, would judge others, well, they should have spayed or neutered, or they didn't spay and neuter, and that's horrible, and they shouldn't have pets. But when, we all know cats adopt us, right? Everybody knows that. Now I have 4 cats, and I didn't get them spayed and neutered in time, and now I got 24, right? So spay neuter is an important reason and community programming that needs to happen in every community. It affects the shelter, it affects everything with regards to whether or not animals go in the shelter and how long they might stay. But for the majority of those animals still going into shelters, and last year, 2023, was about 6 million nationally. Most of them are people problems and not animal problems. So again, that's why when our community leaders and elected officials say, oh, it's just animals, well, guess what? You have animal problems, they're actually people problems, and when you address the people problems, like housing insecurity maybe, then those things get better as well. A lot of our work revolves around looking at what resources are already in place in a community, and this week we're touring other animal welfare organizations, but we have a very bad habit of saying, people will spend hours to tell us what they don't have. But I don't see shelter, well, we have this, so what can we do with that, right? And that's the most important thing. We may have enough staff, but we're not using them in the right, most strategic, most impactful, most efficient way. And this is what we focus on when we come to your shelter and look at every single process and what every staff person is doing. So a pet resource center or services just means I am going to be very aware of why people are surrendering, and I'm going to see how I can link them to resources. Maybe I can provide some resources. Maybe it's a pet pantry, what have you. But just having community and linking people to other people who can help, like fosters on deck, like foster volunteers is one example. But having these services, we know, will reduce economic euthanasia, which, by the way, in not having to do with shelters, we don't know how many economic euthanasias there are. We don't know how many people are going to the veterinarian and their pet might have a medical problem that they can't afford, and the other option for them is euthanasia. We don't have that information, but we do know that when we enhance access to care, people take advantage of it, just like they take advantage of subsidized spay neuter. But these kinds of programs help reduce intake, and again, that's always better for pets and people. So what does it look like? It looks like anything. We have talked to the shelter leadership today about this amazing semi-new program. It's only probably 5 years old. It's called Home to Home. And this is a platform, an online platform that was started by a nonprofit shelter who had a waiting list of animals to be surrendered to the shelter. And I'm talking a waiting list a month out or 5 weeks out. And so the shelter director said, wait a minute, that's not an emergency. We have people that want to adopt, and maybe they didn't find somebody they wanted to adopt at the shelter. Why don't we get their information and make that part of our adoption program? And that's how home-home.org was born. And it is simply to link people who need to place their pets with people who can adopt. And who better to place their pets than their owners, who better to make the right match. So all of those things have just evolved over the last several years and have been so helpful. And when we continue to talk about safety net and the impact in the shelters that we've helped with no additional funding or staff, we're talking about 30 to 80% decreases in owner surrender numbers, which is transformational for shelter teams, transformational for the animals. Access to care, like I alluded to, I'm sure you're all feeling it here as well. Many shelters now who can't find full-time veterinarians. There's so many pet owners, even middle and high-income pet owners, that are struggling to provide care. In 2018, this study came out by an access to care study, and showed that there were tens of millions of people who were in underserved communities or did not have access. And the AVMA, the American Veterinary Medical Association, has said this is a crisis we need to address. Open Door is one of our partners at Maddie's Million Pet Challenge. And if you know any of your veterinarians, I would love if you could share this information with them. But it's simply a veterinary business model that can be used in a for-profit or non-profit clinic, and it's to enhance access to care and still have a financially viable and profitable business, and everybody wins. So there's things like payment plans, which if you say that to a private practice person or veterinarian, you might get like thrown out on your keister, because payment plans have typically been very laborious, but now there's outsourcing companies, and Open Door recently did a study, and in that study they showed 91 to 94% repayment rates, right? So it's a really great way to have it both ways. The veterinarian, the clinic doesn't have to deal with payment plans, and the owner, who, by the way, millennials are the largest pet owning population now, and they are living paycheck to paycheck, and they have to have pay over time options. So that's a part of it. You'll see on the bottom, there's a blog that I wrote for PAS that kind of gives a summary, or if you want more information, you can go to opendoorconsults.org. But I always like to mention this because it is open to every clinic, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, like I said, and I really believe this should be the future of veterinary medicine, because the cost to provide veterinary care has escalated exponentially over inflation. And so it's not that the veterinarians want to charge X, but their costs have gone up, and especially since 2019. Targeted spay-neuter is another very important thing. We advocate for every municipality to subsidize some level of targeted spay-neuter. And what do I mean by that? I mean, targeted groups mean that if I help those people, shelter intake will decrease, need for the rescue groups will decrease, enforcement calls will decrease. Targeted groups are large dogs, right? Because it's more expensive to get them spayed and neutered, therefore they're less likely to be spayed and neutered. They have gigantic litters, and when they end up in shelters, they're the ones that stay the longest. If I had to choose, no, not gonna give a Maltese a subsidized spay neuter, because if they happen to reproduce, they're not even gonna go to the shelter. You rarely see a Maltese in a shelter, because if they do have puppies, they're getting placed very quickly. Cats who have access to the outdoors are their own special topic, so I'll get to that. And then socioeconomically challenged pet owners. And some people have said to us, well, they shouldn't have pets if they can't afford it. All right, let's unpack that. We're talking about tens of millions of people who are financially are disadvantaged, who have pets. People love pets, whether they're rich or poor, and lots of people and lots of us in our lifetime, guess what? At one point we could afford something, at another point we could afford something, at another point we couldn't afford something, right? So saying that people shouldn't adopt pets or have pets if they can't afford them is not a goal that we're ever going to get close to. What we do want to do, especially with the spay-neuter part, is make sure that they're spayed and neutered, that they have access to spay and neuter. I was director in Miami-Dade, Florida. If you know about that part of Florida, 66% Hispanic. And I was told when I started, don't even bother with spay-neuter because nobody will spay-neuter here. I had a free clinic. There were 150 spots a week. 311, our call center, said, Dr. Pisano, you can't afford, or you can't answer the calls. Let us take messages for me. I said, please don't. because I can't return, I don't have the staff to return messages, but they did. And in 3 weeks, I had 4,000 messages. We had 4,000 messages just like that. We never had that many surgeries to offer, and it's much better now, and there's much more spay neuter opportunity there now. But don't tell me that people won't spay neuter. That's the other end of the bell curve, and those people are out there. We're not going to worry about them, because guess what? If you build it, they will come. We're excited to see your spay neuter clinic tomorrow as well, or Thursday, I think we're going. We're very excited to go see your clinic. But these target groups are very important, and the whole point is they impact something else, right? So in Waco, Texas, and these happen to be two communities that were never talking to each other, but those lines that are going up are targeted spay neuter, and then the other two lines that are going down are shelter intake and euthanasia. So a direct inverse correlation. And you could just lay these graphs over each other and they look exactly the same. And as a matter of fact, there was a blip because Jacksonville had lost their funding 1 year and you saw the same correlation, right? You saw the blip. So this is absolutely correlated, and why? It's always the wisest investment for everybody, municipality and nonprofit, because it reduces your workload on the other end. Community cats, I will tell you, we shouldn't be calling them community cats because they're just cats that have access to the outside, and a very small percentage of them are actually feral. About half of cat owners allow their cats in and out, so I don't know why somebody, well-meaning I'm sure, decades ago said, hey, if you see a cat outside, they must be lost, take them to the shelter so their owners can find them. So again, number one, where's my cat people? We know cats are smarter than people, right? We know cats don't get lost, they use the stars. I mean, cats are shysters. We know this about cats. They're not lost. And you think it's your cat named Charlie, and you think it's your cat named Joe, and he comes back fatter with a different collar after he's been gone a day, right? We live differently with cats, and cats live differently with us. When cats go into shelters in the United States, less than 2% are reunited with their families. We have known this for years, so I don't know why anybody would continue a practice with a 98% failure rate. But welcome to animal welfare. We're slow to change, you know. How many of you have heard about the Million Cat Challenge? It's a couple of years old now, right? But the Million Cat Challenge was all about this and saying to communities, hey, look, that pie graph, and I don't know how it's showing up there. So this pie graph is all of the cats that are estimated tens of millions in the United States, and that little teeny weeny sliver are the ones going into shelters. So the point is that taking them into the shelter is not the answer for several reasons. And I'm talking about visually healthy cats, okay? These are 10, 12 pounds, they got a great, full head of hair, right? Great coats. Sick and injured are the ones we need to help. So we would love to have anybody spayed and neutered and put back right where they were found. But if we don't have that capacity, it is not the answer to put them into the shelter. But Dr. Pisano, we have space in the shelter to adopt them out. Okay, let's think about that. Why am I helping a cat, my precious resources? If you're a nonprofit, I know you're working hard for every penny. If you're a municipality, I know the people on this commission and council want to make sure there's no money wasted. So why are we helping a cat that is not in need? And we're going to find him a good home. Okay, what about over 50% of cat owners let their cats in and out? And what about that new adopter trying to make that cat an indoor cat? after he loves going out, right? He is gonna be like, open that door, or I will raise holy HE double hockey sticks, right? This is, so again, we're recycling hats when there's no reason to do that. And there's many more important things we need to do. In your community and every other, you have other issues that people need help with beyond animals. And so, especially for our animal welfare system, let's make sure that we're using our resources as strategically as possible. And that means we're helping the ones that need it most, and we're making sure we're focusing on public and animal safety. Again, I would love for everybody to be spayed and neutered, but that is a big pie chart. So targeted is where it's at. And so TNR, trap, neuter, return, SNR is shelter, neuter, return, but we want the shelter part bypassed, and they go directly to spay neuter. So that benefits everybody. Again, you're gonna decrease your intake of cats. I have never met a cat who loves to be confined in a shelter, and it's stressful for them. The stress leads to upper respiratory infections, and now I have a whole host of symptoms that, thank you very much, I could have prevented. So all kinds of reasons this is better. It increases community immunity against rabies, because when they're sterilized, we want them rabies vaccinated and vaccinated against all those other viral infections. And listen, I am a crazy cat lady. I love cats, but I'm also a homeowner. And if my neighbor had 50 cats and somebody was spraying on my door, I promise you what, I would not be okay with that. So this is, again, I better help my neighbor with access to care or access to spay neuter, right? So she doesn't, or he doesn't end up with 50 cats. So this is, again, as it reflects the shelter, as we're working on these interventions to help keep dogs and puppies out of the shelter, when I take out this whole category of cats that didn't need to be in the shelter, I have now more resources for dogs. And that might mean people to do enrichment, play groups and things like that. So it's a win-win. This is a busy slide. You don't have to worry about the details about it, but my star pupil in Danville, Boyle County, Kentucky, started with 1,200 cats a year in 2019. We said, do this, this, and this, and 2 years later, they had 19 cats coming in the shelter. 19 cats. So as we look at, what do we need to do? And there's a lot of shelters we help, or municipalities that are looking at building shelters or pet resource centers. What do you want to build for? 1,200 cats, 12,000 cats, or 19 cats, right? Just the ones that really needed your help. This stuff works, and what we're here for this week is to figure out how to help your sheriff's office go from A to B, and there's lots of different ways to reach these goals. Public policy is and look, it's halfway through the presentation, and I didn't even talk about the shelter, right? Inside the shelter yet. That's how important these community initiatives and programs are. And so now I'm going to go into what we need to do to make sure that our policies and procedures are appropriate for our animal welfare program. Public policy is number one. State statutes are tough because it takes a million years to get them updated, and there's lots of state statutes that are very, very much outdated. So we do concentrate at the local level, so your city and county ordinances, and we know your state stray hold is 3 days. All the more important that cats should not go into the shelter and be subject to a 3-day stray hold or 5-day stray hold for a 97% failure rate at that goal, right? So that's why it's so important that they bypass the shelter. So stray holds, we look at any policies that may be barriers to having an efficient program, whether it's for the field officers, a cruelty case, or just animals being placed in the shelter. And thankfully, how this industry has evolved from a quite punitive industry where we just cited people, right, for whatever they were doing that was in our ordinance that we thought was inappropriate. Again, we didn't even look at access to care. Thankfully, it's now transitioned to what we refer to as a community-minded approach, which means, like, how can I, like, if I'm a field officer or ACO, an animal control officer, how can I put myself out of business? Like, why am I going to the same neighborhoods and writing the same citations or seeing the same people? In Santa Cruz, California, the team asked themselves that, and they just started once a week rotating to see what they could do in those communities that were their high intake areas, and they turned them into low intake areas. Why? They talk to people. What's the problem? Why? My dog, I'm from another place where we lived out in the country. My dog was never on a leash. I have a hole in my fence. I didn't know I had to walk my dog, blah, blah, blah. All these different things. And they were successful in turning those areas into lower intake areas because they looked at it more as an education and access to care. So reserving those punitive measures for true perpetrators of neglect, cruelty, etc., is really important. One thing that I think was sort of jump-started at the beginning of the pandemic, when all of us had to transition to emergencies only, is the idea that a dog at large that is not injured, endangered, not aggressive, we're not going to pick them up. And it was a very interesting evolution what happened next. Studies started being published since 2019. Memphis, Tennessee, San Antonio, Texas, Dallas and Austin, Texas, and a few others that showed those dogs that were at large and taken to a shelter, number one, national rate, 22% return to owner. Kudos to your shelter, 39% in 2023, that's amazing. But a national average of 22%, to me, is a failure of the system. What these studies showed is those dogs, just like cats, were in their neighborhoods. So that end, already, neighbors are getting their dogs home, and if they may be keeping them in the backyard, going on next door. So the idea is help and empower and equip neighbors to do that. Again, this is not if they're injured, it's not if they're sick or aggressive or anything like that, but a very interesting transition that we're seeing. So the point is exhausting all viable options to surrender, and then you have that group that absolutely need to enter the shelter. And the reason this is so important is it should never be taken lightly to have an animal sheltered, because confinement for people or animals is no fun. And those of us who have devoted our careers and lives to sheltering have worked ourselves to the bone, right? To make them comfortable and give them beds, but you can't argue that it's not a home. And it is stressful. It can be traumatic for those animals that are super sensitive. When we don't get them out quickly, we have an overcapacity problem, we have infectious disease rates that increase, and then when we have illness, people are less likely to adopt, right? Or rescues can't transfer because of illness, right? So there's a whole host of negative sequelae when we take animals into shelters, not the least of which we can't house them humanely or in a fear-free environment. And so if we are going to take them into the shelter, the name of the game is we better have a plan of action from the moment those paws hit that ground. What is the plan? So how many days of the straight hold? When can we get them on our search engines and all of that, so that we minimize the length of stay? So in general, what we see is a 14-day tipping point, especially for dogs, sooner for cats, but especially for dogs. That's when it's like, all right, this is a little too much now, and I'm gonna start really stressing out and getting frustrated and blah, blah, blah. And then what happens is, right, my immune system goes down and more susceptible. So what are the things that I'm gonna do and look at to make sure I have the shortest length of stay? For welcoming our community, convenient hours, easy process, all of those things are little pieces. All these little puzzle pieces add up to getting animals out as quickly as possible. And your shelter, you have nice sized dog runs we were happy to see. They have the divider doors. So those are appropriately designed. You have some outdoor play yards, that's amazing. The UT team, we're so excited they're here because not only do they have portals, but they're gonna come install portals. And if you don't know about that, we should not be housing cats in cages less than 11 square feet because that's related to stress, and that's why they get URIs. That's all related to stress. A simple portal in the middle of 2 cages solves the problem. So they have litter and food, water, and bed on the other side. So no different than us, like nobody wants to eat dinner in the bathroom, right? So neither do cats. So paying attention to their enrichment in kennel, in cage, and then certainly for dogs, play groups. And this is something that we're very passionate about because I personally, for so long, for decades, have visited shelters and the dogs are barking and jumping at me and maybe pogo sticking, and it's so loud in the kennels. And I would think, oh, we're in a shelter, of course they're gonna bark, of course it's loud. Boy, was I wrong. I started visiting shelters doing play groups. I started visiting shelters doing enrichment right. Dogs are snoring. They're laying on their backs. They're sitting there waiting for their treat. It's a game changer. So just this idea of play groups, which by the way could be all volunteer run, play groups mean we give dogs time to play freely in a yard with other dogs. Because leash walking is great and they can get out of the kennel, but it's another barrier form. And what do dogs love to do? They love to eat, they love to play. And they especially love to play with other dogs for the most part. My dog, adopted from a public shelter, was like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. So not everybody likes play groups, but the majority of them do. It reduces their stress hormone. It's really such an amazing program that, again, if you are taking dogs into confinement, this has to be a goal. We know that adoption rates increase, length of stay decreases, that's LOS, decreases, that cage reactivity decreases. So how pleasant or unpleasant is it? Dogs' behavior matter when people come to adopt, right? And they're just not their best selves because they're just like, get me out of here. They're frustrated, right? So play groups change everything. And then, of course, medical surveillance and catching disease early. You're in a tough situation here in your shelter because you don't have a veterinarian on staff, but we're so happy that you do have a per diem vet that comes once a week, and your staff is great about finding and highlighting and looking for any medical problems so they get assistance. And then I wanted, with this whole spay-neuter situation, there's a lot of communities, most communities that are struggling with spay-neuter capacity. And in the beginning, especially of the pandemic, we're saying, well, we have to hold them until they can be spayed and neutered. And that could have been many weeks, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks until the spay-neuter. I will tell you one thing about spay-neuter in our country that's so different than it was 40 years ago. High volume spay-neuter and spay-neuter really wasn't a thing we paid attention to. I mentioned my dog Potato, I adopted from a public shelter. She had medical, so we couldn't spay her, but she had had many litters before she came in as a stray, and her mammary glands were down to the floor. Holy cow, y'all, you know how many dirty looks I got walking that dog? You know how many people came up to me scowling and they said, we breed her? Oh, did she have puppies recently? Like, I was shocked, you know? And I thought, well, that wasn't very nice because you don't know the story, but wow, we really have brainwashed people. Like, it's not acceptable to not spay and neuter your dog or cat today. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I am not worried if we send animals out of the shelter not spayed or neutered yet with an appointment for spay neuter or that spay neuter deposit. No, I'm not worried that we're going to go back to the 70s. We got to get them out of the shelter. We got to get them in homes because it's more comfortable for them. And that leads me to our self-imposed barriers. I know you're my peeps, we love you so much, but we are a judgmental group. And we are afraid that if someone's coming to adopt from our organization, we are afraid that the animal may end up in a bad situation. So we try to control that outcome by putting people through the ringer. Let's call it what it is. 3 of my vet school classmates at my last reunion, I was embarrassed for them to tell me in different states they were denied adoptions from adoption agencies. And we put up these barriers with good intentions, but I'll quote a dish towel I saw recently at a gift store. It said, don't worry, you never had control, you only had anxiety. And how true is that with adoptions? Here's some of the adoption applications we've seen. Number 1, have you been convicted or accused of animal cruelty? Do you live in a house, a condo, a motorhome, a mobile home, or something else? Do you own or rent? How many children do you have? And in 5th grade, what did they get on a math test? I mean, and this one, which is not funny, are you planning on getting pregnant? Which I don't even know how legally, right? These are things we see all the time. These are insulting to people, and it has given us as an industry a bad reputation. How many people have seen sitcoms, Modern Family, Blackish, I can think of others, that make fun, like on Blackish, they had just had a baby, and they were trying to adopt a puppy, and the rescue group was there, and asking them all these questions, and the couple went, that's funny, because we just had a human baby, and nobody asked us one of those questions. And I'm sitting there like, that's embarrassing, that it's on sitcoms, right? So Best Friends did this survey that showed most of the people that went to breeders and pet stores had already gone to a nonprofit, and it was too cumbersome, too invasive, or they were denied. We pushed them there, and then we cry that we don't have enough adopters, right? Cameron Moore's the poster child. She was horribly judgmental. Cameron, stand up so everybody sees you again. Cameron has a nonprofit cat rescue, and when she started, man, you have a blue shirt on, cats don't like blue, denied. You have kids, no way, Jose, denied. So she would go to her offsite adoptions with 10 cats, and guess what? She'd come back with 15 cats, right? Because she was so judgmental, and she's like, you know, my shelter's euthanizing for space. I want to help cats, and I'm not helping cats. Let me let some of this go. So she started little by little. She was charging high adoption fees, $100 a cat, because we want to make sure you're going to be a good cat owner. She started doing $20 for one or BOGO. She started opening up and having conversation with people. And Cameron does not have a shelter. She has a nonprofit rescue. It's just her and her friend and 2 volunteers working their butts off. And a couple of years ago, 1 cage in 11 pet supermarket stores, 1,200 cat adoptions. 1,200 cat adoptions, length of stay, 1-2 days. If it's 3 days, that's a long time. Because she retrained herself. And she said to people, hey, what's your Facebook page? Because I just want to make sure everything's good. And she kept in touch with people, and she said, if there's a problem, let me know. And she got this reputation. And the reason her adoption numbers are down is because she can't find cats to help in her community. That's where we want to be, right? But she's the poster child for transforming her own perceptions about who should and shouldn't adopt. And by the way, less than 3% going into shelters, a small percent being rehomed. Why do we feel like we're the adoption police? Because guess what? People get pets in other places. We're at the bottom of the pile. We should be the ones rolling out the red carpet, right? But this, I think, was a very humbling survey for all of us. So we want to trust that people have good intentions. We want to make it an easy process. If you have not read A Doctor's Welcome by the Humane Society of the United States, you can download it for free at animalsheltering.org. This is the original. They just came out with a new one. Amazing research and studies that changed me. Those guidelines changed my perception. I was very judged. I had all these, right? We have all these beliefs and we think something, and boy, was that a myth buster. So I encourage you to read A Doctor's Welcome. And then, of course, we want our shelters, we want everyone to work together. And in fact, we want a more community animal welfare-based system so that animals aren't sheltered. But that means those volunteers need support, and that rescue groups and new volunteers, foster volunteers need support working together, making it easy to get help and give help. And then this is the list of references that I have at the end for you all, but I wanted to say thank you so much to the chief for having us, because it's not always easy to have an assessment process. The staff's been amazing. Thank you so much, Chief, for having us. We really appreciate it. So I wanted to ask if there's any questions about anything I've said this evening. And you can talk to us afterwards up front as well.
If you have any questions, just step up to this mic, please, because this is being live streamed and recorded, and people at home would like to hear your question on the microphone.
Hi, so one of the things, and first of all, thank you so much for being here. We've been very invested in making improvements in the county. And one of the things that, and I'm sure you're aware of this at this point, is that we have as the staff that takes, sure. So one of the things is that the staff that takes care of the animals at animal control is made up of prison trustees.
Right.
And how do you feel like that works in a structure like that? Because sometimes I fear that it can be very unwelcoming for people that are going into adopt.
That's a great question, and we are working through those questions with the chief and having those conversations. But you know what? Where there's a will, there's a way. There's a way to marry all of it. Using trustees, to me, first of all, for the trustees, I think it's phenomenal. For the animals, I think it's great that they have that consistent care. So maybe there is a way that the trustees come in, clean, care for the animals. The first part of the day, they're usually there 8 to 3. And then the second part of the day is when volunteers and staff come in. That's an idea. So we do think there's ways that this could work and benefit everybody. We, again, want to make sure animals are moving through the system quickly. And if, for example, trustees had to stay in the intake back area, when you look at the statistics for the shelter, there is great potential with just a couple of tweaks and conversations about what I discussed. Does this animal need to come in, or is there other ways? Is it a community cat, right? So that could mean that the adoption area is full, so that people would have access to that area. So we're looking at all those different things. But great question. And what we do is we want everyone to leave the table like this was a good solution, right? We don't want anybody, it's not an us versus them. We want this to work for everyone. And it can. Anybody else?
I have two very big concerns, and one of them would be the intake protocol.
Okay.
That they would weigh the animal, that they would take its picture, that they would vaccinate it, these kind of things, so that if the animal's losing weight, they can go back to the chart and see what the original weight was, and find out a lot of information. And when an animal is turned in, to find out if it's good with kids, where it lived. Was it an outside cat? Was it an inside cat? Just all the questions that people would be asking if they wanted to adopt. And one of my other big concerns is the animal care itself. I know that nothing can be perfect, but sadly, I know of a lot of incidents where animals were left there injured or sick or full of fleas or with broken legs that were never given veterinary care until this doctor came in once a week. So that's my personal concerns, and I know that can be addressed or will be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've already had those conversations about intake. The animals are weighed on intake, so they have that intake weight. And then it's my understanding the veterinarian is vaccinating them, but we're making recommendations around that as well. Yeah.
Okay.
And then absolutely, you're right. When animals are surrendered to the shelter, if they're strays, we don't know we don't know much.
Of course.
But if their owner surrenders, certainly recommend we want as much information as possible just so that we can make the right match for them.
And another thing about that reminds me, owner surrender is very large here, but I really don't think owner surrender is that large, because they're going by state law that if an animal is there however many days a person has to harbor that animal, it belongs to them. But it really doesn't. It might have been there 3 days, it might have been in there 2 weeks while the person is trying to find the home, or another owner or something like that. So I'm also concerned about the owner surrender. I really don't feel like it's as high as it says it is.
Yeah, well, and so those are really good points, but I will always go back to all these opportunities we have for them not to enter the shelter,
Of course,
to develop a foster system so that we do learn more about them if we don't have information, but certainly to get that information, we're on the same page.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Yes,
I know it's
thank
going to
you
be
for
great.
coming.
I want to thank you all for being here tonight. This is really amazing. And we're so excited that you've come to this county, and we're very blessed that you're here. And we want to be a beacon with regard to animal caring and putting the care in animal control. I did quite a bit of research with regard to the topic of prison and inmate programs. There were some really wonderful ones that I've seen, and I think there could be some opportunity. And I've seen it inversely, where in that program, the animals go to the correctional facility as opposed to shipping them. And that has always been the models that I've been seeing out there. And so I'm hoping that we can do that, because the recidivism rate went from 28% down to 7%. And I'd like to see if I can find some of the cost savings with regard to the inmate population and how we can serve both the people and the pets and connect those as well. During my research, there were situations where people do get incarcerated, and it is a temporary timing of needing to have a pet reserve because, of course, their owner is not going to be there to care. And I'm hoping that maybe your organization can also implement some of the programs that I've seen out there, and that we can minimize, even when it comes to those who get incarcerated in the temporary housing aspect. If you can share a little bit about some of these other preventative ways of the intakes, whether it's neighborhood, like how we can, impact it by stretching out the intelligence and reunite pets amongst our own community. I think that would be really wonderful too. So thank you again.
Well, thank you so much for coming and doing that research and bringing that up because, so with the trustees, to your point about animals going to the jails or trustees coming to the shelter, there's no reason it can't be a blend, but what we do recommend in the situations when dogs might go or could be fosters, foster kittens or bottle babies or things like that. When they go, a dog that's going to be in training for a month, then you have to have a long-term facility where, trustees are not going to be coming in and out, which is great for them, but not consistency. And then the other thing is numbers. So when I have a dog at a jail, they're not available for adoption. And so the name of the game is to get them out. And so that's why I do like that the trustees come to the shelter, but not at the expense of not having adopters or volunteers, to be able to, but we do think there could be a blend. And the play groups is a great thing that the trustees can do, So there could be a blend of all of it, but just keeping in mind that the goal is the shortest length of stay, and if we have them somewhere else where they're not available for adoption or a transfer to rescue, then it's just preventing them them getting into a permanent home. But I appreciate the recidivism rate, and I want to tell you about another shelter in California in Mission Hills. I don't know if you've heard about it, but I can talk to you about it later. It's phenomenal. They have a huge prison program, and then when the prisoners are released, they actually work the shelter. And some of these guys have been incarcerated for decades. And it's a phenomenal model. But for here, I think the numbers are low enough that you can get them in and out quickly.
Go ahead.
No.
I'll rush up real quick. How you doing? Mark Bergdorf. Nice to meet you tonight. How are you? Great. I had it was interesting you talked about the different community cat category, for lack of a better term. So it is true, we have property in Davidson County. We partnered with Metro Animal Services out there. They gathered, there were 19 or 20 cats on this one property, and they gathered together all the cats. They adopted some out, they took them, they spayed and neutered them, and then returned them to the community. I found that very interesting, and it's been successful because the older cats they become territorial. And I've noticed that we have not had an increase in cats.
That's right.
Much to my pleasure.
Yeah.
Much to my pleasure. So I'm not an animal person, so to speak. But number two, you did identify a shortage in professionals in servicing veterinary services, in servicing the communities, the clinics. What is the veterinary community doing actively to decrease that shortage widespread? Thank you.
That is such a great question. So there is talk of adding veterinary schools. There's talk about increasing class size. There's also talk, veterinary medicine tends to lag behind human medicine for decades, right? So we've had nurse practitioners, right, and physician's assistants for years and years. That discussion is only being started now in veterinary medicine, but there is talk about that. So those are the big things. The other thing that I am so anxiously waiting, as we all are, is the injectable spay-neuter that Mickelson Foundation is awarding, I think, what is it, Cameron, $15 million or something like crazy for the scientist who develops it. And they do have the injection for cats, but it lasts only 2 years. But they're looking for permanent. And so that can't come quick enough, right? Because high volume spay-neuter veterinarians are 1 in a million. I mean, it is really difficult to find vets that will do high volume surgery. So that has been worked on, and we're getting closer and closer, but unfortunately not there yet. Organizations like Maddie's Fund, PetSmart Charities are constantly looking at new models of veterinary practices. For example, you know how for us, we might go to a surgery center, and that's where they do only skin surgeries, right? So the same kind of idea. And so in Phoenix, PetSmart is piloting a clinic that just does dentals. Because dentals is a big thing that's extremely expensive and cost prohibitive for a lot of people. So looking at the current model, which in my opinion, a retail model of a veterinary clinic is not the right model, right? It's proven not to work. So there's all those different models looked at. So those are just a couple of things. What I don't see happening that I will always advocate for is veterinarians are now, in 1986, it was 50% female, 50% male. It is now well over 90% female. But yet, there's never been attention to these 26-year-old female veterinarians coming out of school and wanting to start families. So that's been, I think, part of the problem as well, that no one's talking about that and problem solving for that. But great question. Big problem. We can't wait to hear your question. We can't wait.
Oh, great. The pressure. I was just wondering, specifically for animal care control here, are they going to do anything, or are you going to help with the website? You go onto their website, there's no photographs, there's nothing, there's links to other adoption groups. And I think even if you Google adoption areas, in your area,
Yeah.
it's way down. And I think for a kill shelter, it really should be further up, and we should really get pictures out there.
Yeah.
Show everybody what they have.
Right. Yeah, we do look at that and make
Good.
recommendations on it. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. Anybody else?
I actually have trouble hearing, so I'm going to try to speak right into the mic, because I
Okay.
can't really hear the questions very well. But one thing, just really quick, I know there's the lack of veterinarians and all of that, but I hope that that's looked at closely in this situation, and I guess just what the solution is at this point, and maybe there's a better option in the future. But I was interested in particular in the home-home.org, mainly because I'm on the Nextdoor app here, and it seems like I used to live in the Atlanta area. At least where I am here, I'm seeing so many more people that are putting up their animals for trying to give them away. And then of course, at that point, you get the people that are coming on that are being very harsh to the people that are
Right.
trying to rehome their animal. And then there's also a view that people should be charging even a nominal amount, because apparently if you give it away free, this is kind of at least the word that's out there, if you're giving it away free, then you're going to give it to somebody that's going to use it to train their dogs,
Right. Yeah.
and that sort of thing. I was wondering kind of if you have the data, like what is the validity behind that? Does that help? Is there a good way to use like a Nextdoor app to get the information out there for the home-home, that sort of thing. So that maybe that's a way to take advantage of that and avoid them going to the shelter.
Great question, and I didn't say it, but thank you for the reminder, is that all of us thought, oh, we better charge a high adoption fee, make sure this is a good home. And then when you look at the research now, when you read A Doctor's Welcome, when you look at the ASPCA studies, there is no correlation. And I was one of those people that thought we should charge high adoption fees. And then I had this epiphany one day and I thought, wait a minute, what if I did buy a dog at a breeder for $5,000 and I found another dog on the street? A year later, am I gonna be laying by my fireplace going, you know, I really do love you more, I paid $5,000 for you? Of course I'm not. Of course I'm not. So, but it's one of the ways we try to control, is this going to be a good pet owner? And we thought correlating paying for it. Everybody triggers to, or some fighter like is gonna come out of, crawl out from under their rock and adopt these animals if they're fee waived, fee adoption free. And we know that that doesn't happen. And we know that because HSUS is in the thick of things. These fighters, people, perpetrators of cruelty, do not have to go anywhere else. They're breeding their own animals. Maybe they are finding strays. They are not going to go to an app or a website or a shelter and give any kind of information or show their license or sign in at a shelter. So it's something that we fear. And just because we're human, we trigger and we amplify the negative, but it's not the reality. What I will say about home to home is there is no obligation. So if I send the shelter, so the shelter's gonna post my pet who I need to find a home. And they're going to link me to somebody who wants to adopt my pet. That is then between the two of us. So if I said, could you help me with this medical cost or that, that's up to me, but is not part of that program, nor do we advocate for it to be. And maybe for medical bills or there's medical problems, maybe that's different. If somebody says, I really need help with these bills, could you possibly help me? But in terms of adoption and fees in general, we know that factually if we look at all the research, and thankfully we have all that now, we have that data. So we can feel comfortable in doing fee-waived adoptions. And we should be, because it's correlated with decreasing length of stay in shelters too. Awesome, thank you so much. Oh, one more question.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Because I could stand up here all day. So I do have a question. Kitten season is upon us.
Yes.
And what is the best way? I noticed we've got our little subject over here.
Yes.
And what is the best way to handle kittens, mamas in shelters?
Don't kidnap the kittens. Thank you for the reminder. I'm giving you each $20 for the great reminders because I usually do say this as part of the cat section. But we worry, right? So we make up stories when we don't have the facts and we hear these cute kittens and they're crying. So we better take them to the shelter, right? Because their mom's not there. But we never trained people to make the distinction between healthy kittens and unhealthy kittens. If you don't use kittenlady.org, use that, depend on it. Hannah has she has one great flyer that shows like, hey, are you worried? If the kittens look like this, leave them. The cats don't do DoorDash. Nobody's bringing them food. They gotta go eat. People don't understand that. So on all our collective websites, we have to say, hey, don't kidnap the kittens. Did you find kittens? Like, here's the only reason you should bring them in. And again, shame on us in this industry. Yeah, if you found newborn kittens, bring them all to the shelter so we can bottle feed them all night long, because we have all the resources and all the people to bottle feed them all night long. No, we don't, and we never did. And it was a disservice because all of those kittens, or so many of them, got euthanized when they should have been kept because the mother is the one that should care for them. But it's hard for people, but telling them ahead of time is hard when they get to the shelter, because they're like, you want me to what? You know? So we want to have that on our website. We want that information out there so that they have that information and know what's the difference when those kittens need help and when they don't.
And when is the right time to separate if a mother comes in pregnant and gives birth, or if a mother comes in with kittens that are surrendered? When is the right time to separate that mother from those kittens?
I mean, listen, that answer is different in a shelter or in my house, right? So it's all different. I mean, they're going to start eating, by 3 weeks, they're going to be totally eating on their own. Should they still be nursing? Yes, but I mean, they can be separated. You want them, well into 8 weeks would be ideal, but sometimes we don't have that luxury and that option.
Okay, and just one more thing. I'm not from this area. I'm a Yankee, I guess you would call me. And the one thing that I have noted from all of the time that I've been coming to these meetings and from anecdotes that I've heard over the course of the last 4 years, there's a lot of, say, history between the organizations, whether it's the municipal organization or the private organizations. And I'm wondering if you have any ideas how to bridge that, because I think that a lot of times gets in our ways. So I'm hoping you can enlighten that, because I'm sure you've encountered it before.
It doesn't sometimes get in the way, it always gets in the way. And so for every community, we are a passionate group of people. We are very ingrained in our beliefs about how animals should be handled or adopted or kept or cared for or owned or what have you. And so number one is talk and communicate with one another, because so many times it's misconceptions, and don't get me started on the ability of social media to spread misconceptions. And that is, I think, the worst thing that can happen and the saddest thing, because guess what? When we don't all work together as groups in animal welfare, support each other, help each other, talk, the animals are the ones that suffer. We help less animals and less people. So this is everywhere. And I think it's because we're such a passionate group of empaths that it is a big problem in our industry. But just talk to each other. See how you can work together and find the ways that find the things that you have in common instead of arguing about the things that you have different. And like I said about, those people will never spay neuter. Yeah, we know. There's 10 people in this community that'll never spay neuter. Do we really want to spend time and energy on that? No, because we have more productive, more important things to do. So talk to each other, hang out, maybe have a happy hour tequila, never hurt anybody. Don't know how to say that in this public forum. But thank you so much. Thank you, Commissioner. We're so excited that you're here. Thank you. And for the ad hoc, thanks for coming and for all your hard work. We appreciate you.
Yeah, I want to thank Dr. Pisano and Maddie's Living Pet Challenge for making this possible. Also, my name is Tim Jones. I'm the chairman of the Animal Control Ad Hoc Committee, and I want to give some newcomers, new faces on seats, just a brief history. We started this committee 5 months ago or so, and this was made possible because Chief Deputy Craddock and also a member of our committee reached out simultaneously to this group, and they agreed to come to do this for us. The Sheriff's Department and the community both realized that times have changed and some updated procedures are probably necessary to give the best care possible that we can do within our budget to these animals. And so we hope to hear good things back from the tour that's going to take place tomorrow. Some good ideas come of that. And then wanted to give you guys some follow-up information. There will be an actual committee meeting on Thursday in this chamber room, same time, 6 o'clock. Feel free to come back to see results or suggestions or findings, things like that, for suggestions going forward. But it will be run as a regular committee meeting. The committee will sit up here. There will be a time of public comments, as there always is at the beginning of the meeting. And then after that time of public comments, it will be committee meeting time. We will do the talking up here. So come, speak your mind. You'll have 5 minutes to speak at the beginning, and then listen to us as we try to come up with some ideas for what to do going forward. And then maybe we talk afterwards too. But thank you guys for coming.